Welcome, everybody. We're going to get started, even though everybody's feeling kind of chatty because it's so nice outside. Tonight, we're doing something a little different. We're going to tape the program meeting. And you notice that we have microphone stands up. So tonight, when it's questions time, come on up to the microphone so that we can record your question and the answer. And I want to thank the volunteers that made this possible. Ji Kim and Jin Kim over here went to a lot of trouble and worked really hard to get this going tonight, along with Steve Williams. And I want to thank Deanna and Brian of Park as well for their help. I'm going to announce some of the upcoming BOF events, and then I'm going to hand this over to Mike Van Riper, and then Rashmi's going to get the show started. The Bekai Struts User BOF event is coming up. It's the Silicon Valley Java User Group meeting on May 14th at Netscape in Mountain View. The Bekai Usability Engineering BOF event is coming up. Practical tips for the use of video and usability research. That's May 20th at Intuit Building 5 in Mountain View. And John Pinto speaking. And Bekai North Bay BOF event, Bursting the Bubble of Bad Software Design, on May 29th at Fair Isaac in San Rafael with Yuri Frovlov and Stephen Gilman of Studio Asterix. And Bekai and the North Bay Multimedia Association, along with a few other groups, are going to be hosting a big mixer event. This is going to be in the North Bay at a venue to be announced, and that's going to be on Wednesday, June 4th. And Mike?
I'm just going to say first, in my BOF chair role, Birds of Feather Group chair, that one of the BOFs that we mentioned the meeting on has just started the Struts User BOF, and there's flyers out in the lobby in case you're a user interface engineer, or if you work with user interface engineers, you could do them a favor and take it home to them. This one's near and dear to my heart because my background is user interface engineering, and this is actually a cross between the development world of user interface engineering and the design world, a group. So it's for those engineers that get involved in at the user interface level, and I'd really like to get this going. So take it back to your user interface engineering friends. Now, as chair, there's two things I need to talk about. The first is not so easy to talk about. The consultants directory, I need to apologize to those of you in the audience that are consultants and Bekai members, because if you are consultants and you've been using that service, it's been down for a few months. And there are reasons why, and we are a volunteer organization, everybody else has jobs, but and we are working on it, and we have put an interim solution thanks to a good suggestion from Mitchell Gass, so that now if you do go to the consultant directory service, you can at least view all the consultants' information. We don't have the search implemented again yet, but we're working on that. I just want you to know that we do take it seriously, and but we are a volunteer organization, and we can't have hard timetables on things. It has to be when the volunteers can get to it. So I just wanted you to know that we are aware of it and working on it. Now the good thing is I wanted to talk about the DUX conference, the Designing for User Experiences. Bekai is a sponsor for one of the events at that conference, and there's been some announcements, but there's still time to RSVP. This is a member-only opportunity, so if you're not a Bekai member, there's still time to become one before the 15th deadline, and it's going to be a very neat opportunity to network with other professionals from multiple disciplines that'll be at this conference in San Francisco. And there's information about the conference on the website calendar. It's coming up in early June, and I encourage you to join us there if you can. That does require an RSVP, and there's information about that as well. So I guess that's all I had to cover, and I'll turn it over to Rashmi.
Welcome. So I'm first going to announce the next month's event. Next month, we're going to have something to do with the DUX conference, and you'll have Richard back hosting that day's event, and it's going to be a surprise. So we don't quite know what it is going to be, but I'm sure it's going to be great. So come back next month to hear some speakers associated with the DUX conference. And now for today's program. And today, what I tried to do was to have two speakers who are exploring somewhat similar issues. I don't know if they would agree, but thinking about interfaces, systems to explore complex data sets when there's no one correct answer, when you're not looking for the right answer, but instead you're looking to understand the patterns and get multiple answers. So at least that was the thought behind today's event. And for that, we have two speakers, Barbara Mirel and Ramana Rao. And the first speaker is Barbara Mirel. And she is a visiting associate professor and research investigator at the University of Michigan, where she teaches information visualization. And she's the author of Interaction Design for Complex Problem Solving. And we have flyers for her upcoming book, which is coming out in September outside. She has authored numerous articles in usability, task analysis, and data visualization, and worked at companies like Lucent Technologies and Scient Corporation. In 2000, she received the ACM SIGDOC Rigo Award for Lifetime Achievement. And with that, Barbara Mirel.
Excuse me 1 minute while I try to set up here.
As a reminder for questions, you'll have to come up to the mics from now on.
No, I went to sleep now. I gotta get back. It's almost. I don't know. I'm gonna have to boot up again. Shit. I'm sorry. I should have turned it off to begin with. Okay.
Computer went to sleep. You need to wake it up.
No, it's not doing anything.
No, it's not doing anything.
No, I froze.
Well, while we're waiting for that, I don't know if I was clear about the DUCS, the Designing User Experience Conference. As part of our sponsorship, there's a opening reception on the evening of June 5th. And it's by RSVP by BayChi member only. But that reception is now open to BayChi members. And you can contact me. There's many references to contacting me on the website. You can contact me at chair@baychi.org or by my own personal alias, mike.vanriper@baychi.org. Chair is probably easiest. If you're interested in that and you're not currently a member, I can help you out. But it will be an interesting night. It's going to be at the Palace Hotel in San Francisco. Reception is from 6:30 until 8 p.m. And like I said, if you're a BayChi member, you're welcome to RSVP with me by the 15th to join us for that reception. And it'll be with the, oh great, enough of the rambling.
Okay, now I'm all set. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here tonight. And as Rashmi said, I just finished a book and with Morgan Kaufman that's coming out in September. And what I want to talk to you about tonight is some of the research that went into the book, and especially focusing on the need for special methods for what I think is a very special case of designing applications for complex problems and helping people through them. The design challenge that I've found after watching over 100 complex problem solvers in their natural settings doing their complex data analysis is that they have very little support for what they really need to do. Regardless of what application they've used, what I've seen is that current designs fall short for a number of reasons. Let me give you one example that I'm going to be talking about tonight as what a complex data question is. I've looked at about 27 to 30 merchandising managers who were working in their stores, and their problem was, how do I get the best product mix for the greatest competitive advantage? Okay. Now, these aren't experts in statistics, and they're not experts in cleansing and conditioning data. But they all do deal with huge amounts of data. They get this data from diverse sources. It's multi-scaled, often time series, number of different geographies, and they're always looking at a number of different multidimensional relationships. Now, most applications today fall short in usefulness for the ways that these non-technical domain specialists really want to solve their complex problems. What I want to talk about tonight briefly is why this is so, and then spend more time talking through an example to show why people need integrated support because their problem solving is integrated, and how observations and modeling of users' practical patterns of inquiry are effective methods for targeting this support. I've found that current designs fall short in usefulness mostly because complex data analysis or exploratory data analysis has very unique dynamics. If we take the product mix example that I'm going to be talking about, those are open-ended questions that people have. There is no one right answer to them. They take many routes and many methods to get there. Again, one method leads to another, and you can't ever predict what they're going to be ahead of time completely. There's no one right answer, as I said. They have to satisfy many stakeholders at once, and often they have contending interests. And there's a lot of other contextual influences that are going on, like the different organizational priorities of the places they work, different cultural dynamics of a place that they work. People who work in an organization who are doing product mix problems where their organization is really averse to risk look at these problems much differently than places that are very tolerant of risk, as you can imagine, when they're trying to figure out which products to put together for the best competitive advantage. So basically, the ways that we usually focus on local features and individual actions just doesn't support the kind of synergy and emergence that typifies complex problem solving. Now, we all are pretty familiar with what those usual ways are. A lot of it happens to be designing for parts, so that we look at problem solving and we say, okay, that takes place between data seeking and data use. And for data seeking, we need to do a number of things. We need to give previews for people. And so we get controls for screens for previews. We need to give overviews. We need to help people review. We need to give them peripheral views and also help give them shared views so that we get a different part for each one of these things that people do. For data use, it's the same thing. People need to transform their data. They need to arrange it in different ways, lay it out in different ways, drill down and roll up, filter, save, print it, report it. And we often have different dialog boxes or different controls or different little interface things that we use to give people help through that. Now, all of these are really very good. They're very exciting. Some of these I worked at and worked on in Visual Insights, and we were thrilled when we got to them. The trouble is that they're mostly appropriate for very well-structured problems. When there's definitely defined goals, there's formalizable methods so that you can formalize the ways that people are going to get from here to there, and when there's one best answer. However, in complex problem solving, knowledge and meaning really lies in the connections and the relationships. And what I want to stress is the need to focus on those connections that bind the way that people do their complex work. That's probably the larger theme that I'm dealing with here. Is that one of the main issues that's really difficult in software development in general is unifying that higher and lower level analysis of users' work. It's particularly important to do so in complex problem solving, as I'll try to show with the example that I'll show tonight. The other thing is knowing which goes in the foreground and which goes in the background at what points in a project. And what I want to really argue is that for conceptual design, when we're just beginning to conceptually design our products, what we really need to do is to look at this higher level that I'm going to be talking about. If we don't, what the effects for complex work are when we do this designing in pieces is that it lacks coherence, because in complex data analysis, the sum of the tasks does not equal the whole of the analysis. It lacks integration. People, when they're solving their complex data questions, move across information and seeking and use constantly, and they move within each one in often unpredictable ways. And there's too little user control. Usefulness suffers because basically what complex problem solving needs is support for higher order reasoning. The glue that binds together people's wayfinding and sense making and makes it coherent, and the social coordination and the social construction of meaning that goes into a lot of analyses that people do when they're trying to solve complex problems. How do we reach that goal? The focus that I want to do tonight is that methods make a difference. This work can't be formalized into serial actions or predictable needs, and so we need to do two things. The first thing is we need to watch people as they do their work and in their own context of work. And that's not just a nice but not necessary thing. That's more dominant, I found, than interviews. You know, you need to couple these things. You need to couple the observations with many things, but the observations are crucial. People can't tell you what it is that they do, often because what you need to know is what they don't do as well. And they don't really know the way they're going to solve a problem until they really encounter it and they see all the different factors that come crowding in on them. Also, how we represent findings makes a difference between whether we give integrated support or piece-by-piece support. And so I want to stress the need to model work as application-level patterns of inquiry in task landscapes. And this is a drawing of a task landscape and a pattern of inquiry. You know, that's the metaphor to be thinking of. And the patterns of inquiry, let's say, are the whole landscape together, all the mountain ranges. And patterns of inquiry, I mean the regularities in the inquiries for specific types of problems in specific domains, where methods may not be exactly the same every time, but the structure of work can be identified. And so we're really kind of designing for bounded openness. And by task landscapes, which are these various parts and sides of the mountains, those are the moves and actions and strategies that analysts put together to move from indeterminacy to resolution, from here to there, in a very uncertain problem space. In the problem mix example that I'm going to use, the emphasis is on data visualizations for complex analysis because visualizations are especially good for cognitive demands of sophisticated inquiries. It makes complexity more manageable if you can enable users to offload some of those cognitive demands to their perceptual system. But the methods I'm talking about don't rely on using data visualizations. Now, what I want to do is to talk about this kind of in reverse order. First, I'm going to talk about the model by talking about this problem of what's the best product mix to put together and show how this can be modeled as a pattern of inquiry in this task landscape, and then talk about some of the methods for gathering data to create these models. The example, as I've said, is putting together the best product assortment. This is just one piece of a lot of different kinds of analyses that merchandising managers, or what they're called category managers in retail, put together. They also do cost-benefit analysis. They try to figure out where the competition is, and I'm just going to be doing a very small piece of this. So keep that in mind as I'm talking, and even that I'm going to show the complexity of just a small piece. I'm going to be looking at a grocery store example where the category of product is shortening and oils. These people go to diverse sources for their data. They go to syndicated data from places like Nielsen or IRI, and they also go to their own proprietary data and some of their own research divisions data that they have. And they look at all these various types of data in order to look at how the products are performing and what kind of assortment they should put together for the best profits. There's a lot of visualizations for retail and these kinds of problems. Places like Polaris, Siebel, Visual Insights has tried to do some. IBM Research is working on a lot of ways of trying to figure these things out. And I'm not talking about any one specific product tonight. My objective isn't to critique any one product. What I'm looking at is a composite of a lot of the kinds of things that these products do all wrapped up in one. So the example that I'm going to run through satisfies that. Now, no matter where I've watched people doing this question and going through their analysis with it, they always start with a quadrant analysis. They divide up their products into winners, losers, sleepers, and opportunities. And so the winners are the ones with high sales and high growth. The losers have low sales and low growth. The sleepers have low sales and high growth, and the opportunities have low sales and high sales and low growth. Now, they want to see where do the different products fall. They want to put together a good assortment, but that's not their main reason. They're not just looking at data to look at data. What they really want to do at this point in their analysis is they want to create an item list to say which ones should they add, which ones should they drop, and which ones might they add, but they're going to have to enhance them somehow with promotions. And so to move towards their goal is to compose this running list that's very provisional. It keeps changing throughout this analysis that they do. The focus that I'm going to do, getting really narrow here, is just on which sleepers should they drop, the ones in this quadrant that are pretty iffy. They could go either way. And they're going to be looking for the poor performers there. So this is a pattern in trying to find some of the poor performers. And they work their way from very beginning, where they're preparing the data, all the way up to finding some sleepers to put on that list of which ones they're going to drop. When they prepare data, it's kind of straightforward, even though it might be very time-consuming. A lot of what they do is they create custom aggregates, like they want to group products in different ways based on attributes. And this is going to change from time to time. It depends on what the market trends are at any given time or the competition. Then they look at the lay of the land and see how are our products doing in general. They kind of get a 10,000-foot down view of things. And then they move on and they begin to narrow down. They select subsets. And then with those subsets, they arrange them in different ways and they bring in more factors. So let's take a little bit closer look at that 5 and 6, the drilling down into subsets and then arranging them and bringing in other factors. One of the things they want to do is to first examine only the sleepers. They have all their data up there and they only want the sleepers. And of those, they only want the top vendors. That's what their first cut is. They want to know which one of the top vendors' products are not worth keeping anymore because they're just not doing well enough. They want to, at the same time, keep the context present all the time. And so they have to drill down in this first context, and then they drill down to sleepers, and then they drill down to only the top vendors. This can get somewhat complex, but for most of the time they can do this. It gets much more difficult when I've watched them say they want to look at the sleepers and the opportunities at the same time just to see their products all together, the top vendors in both of those, just to see what the whole realm of iffy products are. And at that point, they've got to go into a subset of a subset and then a union of a set. And most programs can't help them with that. They just have to, in visualization, it's a very difficult thing to do. Then they want to arrange and bring in more factors. One of the things they want to do in this case that I'm telling you, one of the main priorities in this organization is they really like throwing promotion dollars at their products. Okay, and so that's the way they're going to really, beef up products. And so the main thing that this analyst would want to see is which of my sleepers have already been promoted heavily, because I don't want to throw good money after bad. If I've promoted them a lot and they're not making money, I'm going to drop them. Okay, so they bring in the dollars invested in promotions. Then they try to rearrange that. They look at some of the details of that. All the time that they're going on, they are capturing things. They're saving comments for them because they want to keep a record of this, and they're going to, look back at this and try to decide what to put on their item list with this. They also are going to look at which items responded in what way to price cuts, but their priority is on promotions, and so ultimately they're going to want to weight the way that they're looking at the dollars that are on promotions more heavily than the way they're going to weight the price cuts. These are all real standard things that they do. They also have a lot of difficulty doing them. There's still more factors to consider. They want to look at which of these candidates belong to my preferred suppliers. Okay? Preferred suppliers give them incentives to sell certain things. So even when things look like losers or they look like they're in the poor performing category of the sleepers, they're very likely going to keep them if they can find some justification for it. So they want to bring in which of these products belong to their preferred suppliers. Now, some of these preferred suppliers aren't the top vendors, so they aren't highlighted here in color. Remember, only the top vendors are selected, and so this is the backstory. They're the ones that are grayed out, and that's partly why they wanted to keep the context present, so they could see this. This backstory now becomes dominant. It becomes very important for them to look at this, and they want to group these in certain ways. This is where they run into huge amounts of problems because they can't necessarily sort by preferred suppliers. They're not in alphabetical order. They want those all grouped together, and there's no traits for that. They haven't done these custom aggregates to begin with beforehand, so they either want to do them on the fly now or they want some way to look for their preferred suppliers. And they're in the middle of an analysis, and they're in the middle of a train of thought. Okay, and so there's nothing that really helps them move seamlessly through these kinds of things. Some people might not look at preferred suppliers. Some people might. And if they do, it's really important to them to be able to do this. So this is where they want to keep notes also to see whether they're going to keep these later, which means as they've done more analysis with different quadrants and also with competitors, they want to see, are there any duplicates that they have that they were thinking of keeping, and could they say that the profile of their preferred suppliers look like these duplicates and perhaps put their preferred suppliers in instead of the ones that they have. So this is kind of that interdependency between phases of inquiry, all the while leading to their main item list, which is the main thing that they want as the outcome of this. They're still not done with this pattern of inquiry. They still have number 7 and 8 to do, which is they have to finally identify which ones are the poor performers that they're going to provisionally say they're going to drop. They need to confirm that. And to confirm that, they need to look at numerous measures. If they've just been looking at sales and growth, then they want to look at other things in relation to each other, like profit, market share, volume sales, cost of goods sold, and they want to write comments on that. And they want to keep comparing, and they want to make sure that these products that they're thinking of dropping are poor performers on all scores. After they do this, and they come up with ones that they're thinking of dropping, what they want to do then is to run a number of what-if scenarios. If I drop this, what's my bottom line in terms of sales and profits? So they want to erase these out of the data set for a while, see how things are without them, and then come back and bring them in and run this a number of times. So they want to run back and forth through a number of different analyses. Based on results, they're going to go one direction or another. A lot they need to prepare for later, and they want to prepare these findings to feed into an item list. There's a lot of complexity to support here. They need a program that adapts to the contextual demands, things like an organization's priority on promotions rather than price cuts and being able to weight that. They need to conduct some complex visual querying, the visual equivalent of nested queries. They need to make seamless comparisons, and they need to analyze and compose in tandem. These things are going on side by side. It's not like they say, okay, now I've done my analysis, I'm going to go and I'm going to write all the comments on them. And they need to keep track of where I am and what I know. All of these things require user adaptability, the ability to seed a workspace so that you can see what it is that you know so far, where you've been, where you're going to go next. They need to be able to do things like custom aggregates on the fly, and they need intelligence built into the system to know the kinds of things that they might do. They often do repetitious acts, and it would be really good for them if they could just replace some of those, so they need some kind of built-in intelligence that knows what constitutes an event that's worthy of replaying in this domain for these specialists in this problem. In addition, most of these 5 things that I'm looking at as the complexity to support are some of the things that are supported least right now for users. They're some of the main areas that they really need help in. I just showed you patterns for that one particular thing. It gets even more complicated. I'm not going to go into this one, but if they've done an analysis over here and they finished it, and then they go on to the next phase, and they run some competitive analysis that then calls into question, let's say, what they found about their sleepers, they're going to go back here And then they're going to start going backtrack. They're going to find different things. And they're very likely going to end up with a whole different provisional list than what they started with. And so these patterns overlap. They're adjacent. They get even more complicated there. And that's when we need to know how people work in this higher order reasoning space when they're moving back and forth among these patterns. How do we discover these complex work demands? What I would like to really stress is the need to observe people doing their work, observing in multiple sites, looking at many users, looking over time, and going with more than just one person so that you always have reality checks and you can compare your notes at the end and do debriefing and build up the analysis that way. You want to look at people's work with and without the prototypes, examine less than best cases, things like breakdowns and their effects, poor choices, the effects of paths not taken, and when users are really reduced in confidence. And look at the interactions and dependencies between multiple contextual conditions. Because complex problem solving is dynamic, because it's emergent, it really is reacting so much to situational conditions and idiosyncrasies. And so there's many contexts to look at. And not going into all of them at all, you've got the problem context, you've got the technology and the data, you've got the work domain and the whole organizational scheme, and then all those subjective, cognitive, and motivational things that are going on in a person. And what we really need to do is not look at any one of those, but look at the interactions among them and find out what the effects of the interactions are, because the effects of them are really the constraints of their problem solving. The effects of the interactions among these conditions will open some actions as possible and close others. And so we need to find those things out when we're observing people. Where to focus in terms of analyzing the data is looking at this application level before jumping down to the task object level, because that's where we're going to find the coherence and the integration, and to look at what counts as a chunk of a task to a person, what are their patterns, what are their decision points, what are variable criteria, what's relevant information and its functional role, what are some of the changes that threaten the stability of a pattern, and what are the indicators of those changes, what are ways to enhance or re-engineer work, and that includes some common omissions. Expert problem solvers, in the complex problem solving literature, there's a lot of talk about things that experts typically do that make them solve problems less than efficiently. And so we need to begin to look for those when we're observing things and also bring that into the analysis. And what control users need. Probably one of the main things that's an issue in designing for complex problem solving is designers giving up control and giving it to users. And knowing when it is they need to make those discretionary decisions and structuring an environment that they can do that, but still giving them the choices for it. So overall, what I want to really kind of leave with is the coherence requires connecting the procedural, spatial, and structural elements of work. Observe patterns of inquiry capture that coherence because they reveal the variability, regularity, and choice points in all the different directions people can go. And they show where and how to support that structured freedom that people need. The implications are pretty large, I think, for designing. It shifts the design emphasis from a lot of conventional ways that are very well-worn and effective for well-structured tasks, but just don't work as well for complex problem solving. We need to change from looking at features to classes of program interactions that are governed by users' initiatives and the directions they're going to take. So a lot of times what they need to do is just a high-level analysis, and they just need to do it in a keystroke. One of the things with these category managers is they are constantly, when they look at the top vendors, they're constantly saying, okay, so what's their cumulative, what's their joint market share? And they don't want to have to add that percentage up all the time. So one of the things that we actually did develop was an analysis in a keystroke where wherever they selected anything, they always got the total market share for people. So it's at that level that people are doing things that we need to give them those quick keystrokes. It changes the emphasis from generic to domain content. I would say a domain-specific kind of thing, and the example I just gave is that they analyze and compose in tandem. and they do it at specific points. And we need to be able to know that because we need to be able to support that. So we need to kind of build that domain knowledge into the ways we structure our applications. It goes from less to greater choice. People are constantly setting up the data in different ways, and they need their own choices for what the entry point should be. They need choices about complex querying and weighting. And it goes from thinking that we can kind of move people through fixed actions to letting them do a lot more in an ad hoc way. These are some big orders for the ways that design needs to kind of reshift, and it also takes a whole software team, not just an HCI approach to it. Because I guess, and in ending, one of the main things with all of this is that this kind of interactivity, this kind of support for complex problem solving needs to be built in from the start. It isn't just an interface issue, it's the functionality and the architecture issue, and it means a whole team looking at the ways people do their work in a different way than we've been doing. So, any questions?
Hi, Dan Russell from IBM Almaden. I really like the notion of flowing adhocracy, but I'm not quite sure what you mean. I'm particularly interested in how people who are in these complex analysis problem situations, how they formulate their queries, and it would be great to give them flowing adhocracy, but tell me more about what you mean by that.
Okay, that's really, when I see people work, they often derive values on the fly, or they form new fields on the fly, they group things on the fly, and then they want to ungroup them. So it's really more, and those aren't really necessarily predictable what they're going to do. A lot of it could be just their own idiosyncrasy or the way their organization goes. So it's giving people a lot more leeway to be able to do ad hoc analysis.
I'm trying to understand the difference between menu items, which allow me to do arbitrary actions on data sets, versus what you just said. Can you contrast that a little bit?
Okay, I'm thinking in terms, and this might be a visualization issue, and I'm not sure, but in terms of reading data in, what they really want to do is they want to change the data source. They want to put a new field in there and show it all together in a new way. And they've read data in from their source, let's say. And they don't want to go back out and go to that source and create the new field and then bring it into the visualization. They want to do it all the time in their visualization. And menu items don't let them do that. Because it's the data underneath, because once you change one field and bring other things, then you're going to change a lot of the display as well as some of the calculations, possibly.
On a basic interface question, it seems like one of the things that you're trying to do is expand out the number of interactions a person can do. I mean, some of the old traditional systems would lead you down a garden path to an analysis. Are you looking at abandoning the whole menu items and 500 menu items to choose from and just say, we're just going to go back to a natural language-ish command line because, well, it seemed to work?
No, I'm really not, I don't think. If I had anything that I would be saying more that I would like to see more of, it's more putting cues in the environment itself. So, bringing more things in that highlight something that's going to be important to people. A lot of it comes building in more intelligence underneath. That this is a common pattern that people do, and you're going to highlight that this, they're going astray here. There's a real common error they all, they do a lot of the times. And so, you bring that up, or you have more markers that show where they've been, where they're going next, what they found out at certain places. It's not an abandoning of menu items. It's much more an integrating aspect of them. So at some higher level, you might need to bring things in. With the analysis and the compose thing, there are places that have put in different kinds of functions that, okay, here you can save, you can compose, you can put it into your PowerPoint presentation, you can put it on a website and do that kind of stuff. But it's too piecemeal for what people want to do because they're flowing at that point. They really want something that's much more, and one of the examples that I've seen uses drag and drop more than anything else. So that they can just drag and drop to a workspace and put in different comments, put it off to the side, go back to what they were doing. So it's on their workspace, and they're more in charge of it. So but that's not to say that the menu items wouldn't still be there. It's just I wouldn't rely on them to move somebody through.
So it sounds like one of the things is putting people much more in control of being able to add items, push things around, and also having the intelligence of the machine throw up little hints that it saw something.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Right.
Jog McKinley Park. So these complex problems, you described very clearly that people are having multiple subtasks they're working on simultaneously, and the data is large and complex. I was curious about all these marketing folks that you studied, whether they were suffering from resource limitations. I would suspect that they were. For example, the screen space would be too small, and so if they had these multiple subtasks to work on, you would have the problem of switching back and forth and just window contention and all that sort of overlap. And I was wondering how you were able to, or I didn't even see it in your description, the overhead of that kind of stuff and the impact it would actually have on their ability to do the task at all.
It has a huge impact on it. That's one of those many conditions in those boxes. Those are like the technological conditions.
In your book, and I'll be able to look at it?
Oh, you won't have an answer for it, though. Right. No, they have, it has a big impact. From what I've seen, and I don't know whether this is what you're implying or not, I can't say, well, those are the people I saw, and they're in some minority that have those kind of, restrictions in that way. Because everybody that I've seen, even when I've watched, another domain I watched is troubleshooters, and they have 2 monitors up, and they've got a lot of screen space, and they still can't get all their work done with all of that. They put all their resources up there, but then they get the problem of window clutter.
Well, my point isn't that some people have these problems, some people don't. I think that everyone has the problem, but in terms of actually getting their task done, there's sort of like 2 layers. There's the layer of actually, figuring out which ones to drop, and then there's the layer of just managing their workspace so that they can actually survive it.
Right.
And I didn't see that in your model at all, the fact that that if you could cleanly differentiate it out, you'd have sort of maybe perhaps a clean description of how there might be 4 or 5 strategies of actually solving the problem and 4 or 5 strategies of actually surviving the fact that you have this resource contention.
Right. No, I think that's a really good point. And I think that's a really important point that anybody who's designing this really has to do that when they're doing the design. I think that from most of my experiences, the designs themselves haven't gotten to that point where people are separating that, and they really are just caring about showing them that managing part, showing them how to work the program instead of how to do their problems. Right. So I guess if you're hearing that, the focus on that upper level is because that's the part I see missing in a lot of design teams.
If I understood you correctly, you're stressing not only the complexity of the individual tasks, but also the idiosyncrasy, how each domain is different and each user in the domain is different. Could you then at least speak to the regularity that's there that allows us to hope that there is in fact a solution to all of this?
No, I mean the kind of thing that I showed is the pattern, moving through those kinds of structures to the work were repetitive. Those were regular across everybody that I saw. So it's a matter of really looking at what's really regular, what can you count on. That's kind of the space that you constrain for them. And within that, they need some choices that they can make because they're going to go in various directions. But they are going to move to specific phases. They do have part of the convention of any domain and any work is that they do have those kinds of structures you can see. It's kind of like in written discourse, it's the same as genres in a novel. Different genres of writing. Writers take those in a lot of different ways, but underneath you see that structure there, and you see the way they're moving through that.
I'll just yell out. It seems like what you're saying is a feature is something that can't be daisy-chained effectively. If features can be, the inputs and outputs can be meshed together easily, then that sort of becomes a class of interaction. Mm-hmm. So it seems like what you're saying is today we build programs where we get a group of developers together and they dish out the different features, and we don't make sure that all the features can be daisy-chained inputs and outputs.
That's very much what I'm saying. So I'm not getting away from features. I'm just saying that we shouldn't jump prematurely to them. There's the difference, it's the difference between doing a piece-by-piece design and an elegant design. You want to daisy chain them because ultimately you want your interface to solve the most problems with a single solution instead of having lots of different features solving lots of different problems. So yeah, I'm seeing this as more when teams are working with users who have complex problems, rather than saying, they're not that complex because we can just decompose them, to saying, yeah, they are. Let's see what integrates everything. Let's see what needs to be put together. Then we can move down to the object level. Yeah, that's very much what I'm saying.
I have to think about what you just said, but when I came up here, I was thinking, in the scientific world, you have a protocol that you have to follow, especially if you're doing medical analysis, and I don't see that here with these marketers. Is that something you would warn them against? Oh, you're violating standard protocol by having too small a selection set or something, or.
So tell me a little bit what you mean by a protocol for marketers, what it would be.
Well, for example, when you go in, you get an MRI. There are certain steps that are done to that MRI. And there's latitude that they have in doing those steps. And there's judgment where they set the region of interest, where they set all those other things. And you can build guides for that. Is that what you're talking about, is building guides for general sorts of problems like this?
For part of them, yeah. So I mean, when they're going and they're looking at, what constitutes a sleeper, what's the baseline that I'm using, they have pretty standard things that they're doing. That's what I would say is part of their patterns that they go through.
Does the user interface know that they're looking for a sleeper when they actually do something?
That's not built into a lot of the programs, no. I mean, even at that level, that they chunk their work into, there's first the quadrant analysis, and then I'm going to just focus in on that. That amount of the domain is not always that specific in there. No, and that gets to be very difficult for them.
So you have to link the task back to what their
conventions are. Yeah, very much.
Okay.
To make it easier for them. I mean, they can do, the kind of comment that I always get back is I'll come and I'll tell the developers, this is what they want to do, and they can't do it. And they'll say, they can do it. They first have to swipe this, then they have to go in this menu, then they have to drill down here. Step by step, the developers know they can do it, but the users won't do it.
So that has to do with the question that I have, and that is that there's a difference between people who are experts in the domain and people who are experts in doing data analysis, exploratory data analysis, or in visualization. And it looks like what you did was you looked at the domain experts, and the question is, did you look at how the visualization experts would solve the types of problems that the domain experts are looking at? So domain experts, they know the questions that they want. They don't and they could recognize when they see the answer, they don't necessarily know how to get from the questions that they have to the answers that they want.
No, and I didn't look at them. I didn't look at them when they became experts on the visualization if they kept with the program. This was introducing the program, and that's a very good point. They were expert problem solvers and expert domains. They were not experts in visualizations. And that, again, was the answer that I would get from the developers, is, well, you can do it. Now, would they have come to that, the users a year and a half after they were using it? I'm not sure. And I don't know. And one of the things that I look for constantly in literature are usability studies of people and what their learning curve is, especially on visualizations, and I don't find that very much, if at all. I mean, that's one of the real strong lackings in the visualization field, is not just what do people think when they see these things that are new, but after a year and a half, what do they now want to know? And is the program robust enough to do that? Because we don't know that yet, I don't think. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Do you need me to get this one off?
Yeah, probably.
And now for our next speaker, who's Ramana Rao from Inxight Software.
Do you have
and
your mic?
the title of his talk is The Long and Winding Road to Information Flow. Ramana is CTO and founder of Inxight Software, a spin-out from Xerox PARC, so he's feeling right at home here. Previously at PARC, Ramana performed pioneering work in intelligent information access, digital libraries, information visualization, and user interfaces. His work includes 25 patent filings and numerous refereed research papers and he received his bachelor's and master's degrees in computer science and engineering from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And I'm hoping that has given him enough time to set up, because I don't know how to do small talk
Solving
like
a complex
Mike.
problem. Yeah, so I worked for 10 years within sort of a baseball throw of here, so I feel pretty comfortable here. Actually, it feels like home. Let me see whether this, Houston. Okay, so, solving the complex problem of what am I going to talk about. I'll tell you that these slides have never been seen. I swear, going into this, I said, I'm not going to use any slide I've ever used before. So you're gonna notice that, I think. So the strategy I took for this talk was, hey, there's a bunch of stuff I've been wanting to talk about, to think about, so on. This is an audience that I got to reach for a little bit. And so I'm going to use this to drive some work, right? Get scared and see what I can do, right? So that's a wicked problem or a complex problem. There's some real dangers and so on. But again, having worked at Park for many years, I feel safe taking some risks in this auditorium. And so what this talk is really going to be is a tour of some thoughts that I just haven't been able to let go over a long period of time. Most of them are not my thoughts. Some of them are the thoughts of people sitting out there, like Jock and Dan and a few others, Polly for sure. And so I learned stuff from a bunch of people I rubbed against. And so it's really about trying to organize those thoughts. It's about how can a head get around something big? How can you get your head wrapped around something really big? And then how can we get our heads wrapped around really hard problems, complexities, wicked problems? So that's that's the subject matter, and actually how I tried to do the talk, I guess, an editor would probably cut this line, is to try to make the talk mimic that process for me. And so, it's a design problem. It's fundamentally a design problem. The way I think about these things at this stage is not a computer scientist or a writer or a, everything I've learned about psychology or anything else. I think about it as a design problem. How do you recognize the influence of multiple realities on this point, this point of use where somebody is going to use something, and all these things matter. So how do you get your head wrapped around that? And so that's what this talk is going to be about. It starts with a bit of history. I bet you can all read those little things, right? Can you all read them? Okay, just read. I'll be quiet for 10 minutes. So a lot of information that I feel matters. It's organized somehow. It's just it's there for now. So I'm going to give you a tour of these thoughts. I'm going to go focus on different parts of this and try to get a sense of history here. So you got a sense, it's a timeline starting from 1945 when Vannevar Bush's article was written and nothing happened for 15 years. Well, something happened for 15 years, like I guess the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, but nothing related to this auditorium. They're a little bit later, sure. They were alive. They were alive. They weren't famous. Who cares about famous? They became famous later. So anyway, didn't get myself out of that, I guess. All right, so now I'm going to do this dangerous thing of trying to drive while I talk. Maybe I'll get a cell phone call too while I'm doing this. So I'm going to zoom in. And go over to this point in history. Now you can read it a little bit? Okay. So that quote is a very, very famous quote by now. I think it's from Man-Computer Symbiosis. The hope is that in not too many years, human brains and computer machines computing machines will be coupled together very tightly, and that the resulting partnership will think as no human brain has ever thought and processed data in a way not approached by the information handling machines we know today. 1960. We're not quite there. And it's not even clear that I subscribe to the literal quote itself. I'm not ready to be in partnership with a machine, personally. I just think it's like paper or other things that we use. It's subject to our will. But in that paper is a lot more creative thought than that. You shouldn't take sort of the AI pot shot at this paper. And so then you get this series of papers in the 60s and a really interesting period where Licklider got in control of DARPA and started funding Engelbart, and Ivan Sutherland did this thing, and then they started to thinking about the network, and Alan Kay wrote his dissertation. And some interesting concepts fell out of that period. The idea that we can augment each of our intellects, the notion, it was his word, intergalactic network of Licklider, right? I guess he was prone to grand statements. First partnerships with machines, and then intergalactic networks. But he funded some incredible people. Across this period, really, there's these three key themes that I think are popping up. There's this issue of augmenting the human intellect. How can you make one person have a bigger head? Not an ego, I don't mean. I mean, get more stuff into it. Networks to enhance communication. How can we get people talking independent of space, not because of without regard to the accidents of locality? And then really, I think it fills in with Alan Kay and I guess Ivan Sutherland too. Stop thinking about this just as a thinking tool, but as an imagination tool, simulations and models, and an imagination amplifier, fantasy amplifier. And I think that really fills in when sort of the musicians come to town as opposed to the psychologists or something, right? And so if you look at that period, there was time sharing was really what everything was based on, interactive computing. It was sort of, hey, rather than using, you go and you use cards to get the computer to do what you want it to do, you bring terminals to the people. But it was still mainframe computing, basically. But using time sharing, everybody could share it, because humans were supposedly slow, and computers were supposedly fast. So that's that period. And you started seeing, in the late 60s, the concept of internetworking. Once Licklider had funded various places where they had heavy time-sharing devices, he wanted to connect them together, and particularly Bob Taylor, now head of DARPA, wanted to connect these things together. And then really it wasn't until 70s when PARC was founded that you start really thinking about personal computing and distributed computing. What changed there, actually maybe it's most symbolized by the bitmap display. Because bitmaps display kind of indicate a way in which computers were slow and humans were fast, right? We're very good at seeing lots of things and making sense of it really quickly when it comes through our eyes. Computers at that time couldn't generate complex graphics. It took a lot of memory. They were working in core memory. They didn't have solid-state memory until the early 70s. And so nobody would spend all this money on memory to build a bitmap display. Well, PARC started doing it because by then, everybody was starting to recognize Moore's law and the power of Moore's law and the power of time travel kind of thinking, of using very expensive machines for then, but just wait 3 years or 6 years and they won't be so expensive. And so they could imagine personal computing. Once they had computers sitting right in front of people's faces, they wanted to network them together too. And that led to distributed computing. Computers that were just in the back room as servers. So that's the flow of ideas there. The next, cool. That's actually how this talk felt about an hour ago. Okay, so Houston. I think my machine did crash. Okay, I'm going to reboot and dance for a while. Okay. So now can I visualize my visualization? Because that's how I was going to keep oriented, right? It was a shared representation. I was just going to tour through it. I didn't have to practice this. And it was going to guide me down this thing, right? By the way, I changed the name of the talk from The Long and Winding Road to A Long and Winding Road. Because all of a sudden, and also somebody that transformed my abstract, lost some sense in it that I was worried about, which was talking about my personal journey to information flow, like I'm in some higher state of enlightenment. Well, no, it's my journey to the concept of understanding information flow or something. I'm not enlightened yet. I'm working on it. Okay, so we were talking about all these little things that came out of the big themes of personal computing, things like bitmap displays and so on, right? So all of those are falling into park. So one of the reasons I talked about what I talked about in the upper left hand is for a long time I thought history, I arrived at Park in 1981 and or 1980 actually for the first time. And the intranet was incredible. It was a real intranet. And I could find all these great documents that talked about, mousing through Alto Land or something. There was a document like that. And there's a bunch of other really interesting documents on the intranet. And it wasn't called an intranet, of course. And that's when I first started realizing, what power it was to be on a network and to realize that you could connect directly to other people through their thoughts as captured on, on disks, right? It was a very powerful thought that I think by now 100 million people have had. That's a pretty amazing, collective enlightenment. So what's going on now? My million programs are starting their little inits. My million init march. Okay. Yeah, probably the one that will prevent that collapse that just happened. Okay, so through the 80s and the 90s is really when we started seeing PCs and the network go mainstream. And so you saw the release of Star in '81, you saw the release of the Macintosh in '84, and everybody started having personal computing. And then a few years after HTTP and after the ARPANET went public or commercial, you started seeing the rise of the network. And so now we are here. There are 100 million hosts on the internet. There's 500 million PC users, right? So it's a remarkable rise that people have talked about in lots of different ways. And so if you think about that rise, what situation does it put us in? It puts us in the situation where, we have to think about what's happened across this area. What would Licklider think right now? Or Engelbart? Engelbart is working away right now. And it's like he's in his own private garden or something. There's a way in which most of the world doesn't know about him still, even though he's been quite celebrated in recent years. And there's a certain kind, it's like a South American, it's like a magical realism novel where the general climbs in a tree and butterfly dust starts, falling on him or something like that. There's a certain sadness in the scene or something because there's all this activity all over. There's a sadness and there's also incredible beauty. And so if we think about, well, what's the challenge right now in trying to really solve or get to the vision that they even had in the 60s? There's a few things that have happened, which are one, all the stuff is out there. We have a social stuckedness problem, as I call it, right? It's a lot harder to change anything. Try to have any new UI idea and get it into Microsoft. It's almost been 7, 8 years ago now when I was trying to get a company spun out of here. At the same time, one of my colleagues, George Robertson, whose ideas are imprinted on my brain, I guess, went to Microsoft thinking that would be a faster route to get visualizations into the market. So, a lot of things happen. When you have a dominant platform, it's very hard to cause UI innovations like this. And it's very hard to cause all kinds of innovations. Those are just social problems. So what are the things that you got to think about? The complexities that we have, modern complexities. There's been a whole movement, since the 60s. The 60s, all of this motion was controlled by physicists, electrical engineers, mathematicians there were no computer scientists even, practically. The first undergraduates in computer science hadn't been issued. Psychologists were coming in. The psychologists became the best funders because they had the best taste or something. And they understood people or something. But anyway, whatever the reason, I'm being glib with history. And so the psychologists, well, since then, we've seen a lot of attention from social scientists and the rise of anthropology in the workplace and ideas like that that have really affected our sense of design and design in broader settings. And so I think those are things that help you think, well, why, if we're still going to continue this pursuit of getting us all to be more creative, being able to solve more complex problems, we can't change the little things in the platform. How do we think about these issues? How do we try to solve bigger problems, bigger social problems? What did I do? I escaped. Okay, come on. Okay. Okay, to begin with, let's begin with the human. And so we get this picture of a human being bound up, basically. If you think about all the constraints on us. First, we hear about bounded rationality from Herb Simon, right? There are these physical and cognitive bounds. We have limits in our head. We have limits around us. We only have so much time in a day, so on. Then we are captured in social structures, right? We're all one people, one person each. And then we're in groups. We're usually in many groups. You're in a family, you're in a work group, so on. You're in many organizations, you're in many communities, and then you get into one nation, and then somehow you're one of all kinds, right? So you get some kind of mathematical set, top and bottom, and you get all these rings that hold you in various ways. And if you think about doing anything, any one of those rings can be impinging upon you at that very second and affecting how you look at things or how you think about things and so on. Then you're trying to get something done, right? You get the task hierarchy. And so there's structure and all that, right? There's a hierarchy there of little things. You do little things because you're trying to do something bigger, Like you're trying to have a life, so you figure out something you're better at than other people so that you can, and down, right? And you tie your shoe so that you can, get out the door. But why are you getting out the door? So you get to all these levels. It's a giant tree of little acts at the bottom. And somehow they're organized into some intentional structure. Those structures are defined by those rings. These trees are rooted in social structures. A lot of these things you do because you're a part of it. You blow your child's nose because you're their father. You love them, whatever. And then this is a journey across time. I mean, this seems like a hopelessly complex reality. We're tied up. How can anybody get anything done, right? First, they don't think about all this, right? But we tend to think about all this and talk about all this and try to use our knowledge of all of this in order to do a design, right? And so all of those things matter. Now, there's a way to think about this that is more liberating. That human is an individual. He's not every man. He's not organization man. He's a whole person. And that's something that is, we can understand in 2000. I'm not sure Licklider could. Maybe a lot of things have happened between 1960s, including the Beatles, and Douglas and Engelbart, and a lot of other things that we start to embrace our wholeness as humans, and we start to have a bigger picture of all the things that matter. So if you start thinking about all of these things not as constraints, but as resources, as tools, that the fact that people are all incredibly resourceful, that they're trying to reach for the stars, that they really have aspirations, they're trying to do good jobs, and everybody feels that way. When you watch anybody doing anything against the constraints of what they have, they amazingly get their job done. Or they, of course we can talk about incompetent and competent people and talk about better and worse people, and you can train people and so on. But basically, when you watch anybody, this is the insight of anthropology. They're incredibly resourceful in solving their problems against the limits, set upon them. So that's my picture of human reality. Information reality. So we have this thing we've been talking about. This is something I think the early information theorists and the symbol manipulators and so on really thought well about. And the philosophers have all thought about this before even computing came along. So you got this plane of symbols, a bunch of little things that point at other things that represent things in the world. We build these structures out of them, these symbol structures, right? We make a sentence out of words. We make a book out of sentences. We build collections of books. We build libraries. So we're building this higher and higher level set of structures that capture these symbols. And in fact, the cognitive revolution is about saying symbols are in our head too. What's inside there? Well, what else can be in there if it's not symbols that are representing things in the world? And we internalize symbols through views of the world in various ways. A kind of view of the world is a language. If you know a language, you know how symbols are built by rules up into structures so that you can start to understand particular symbol structures. And so despite our limitations in only being able to deal with 7 symbols at a time, if there's 7 symbol structures, which you can deal with as chunks, you can understand much more complex things. And so this is about the world of information. And if you look at all processes in the world of information, they're fundamentally, you see the loops and you see the flows, and they're always some kind of thing that mirrors a publishing process. You gather a bunch of stuff, you organize it somehow, you compose it, and then you deliver it back out. So that loop. By now we recognize that it's a lot more intricate than the basic simple flow. It never happens in a simple way of, from beginning to end without hesitation. That's the information reality. So now how humans interacting with information. This is an area that most of my attention has been focused on, and the work here at Park that I was part of in the Intelligent Information Access Group and visualization and text mining technologies. It's all about how do you get value out of content, out of these symbol structures that are outside your head, laying around on disk. And because we're not doing a good job, they're just laying there on disk, being underutilized. And so generally, we have something that was characterized by people here, and that I think it's similar to things that you see all over the place. The sense-making loop of some kind. You're trying to make some kind of structure, like a symbol structure you can put back out there, and you go through these stages of generating some kind of goal structure. What is it that the structure has to fulfill? What is it that you want to do with this document that you're going to produce or this report? And a lot of that goal structure comes from, your social realities or other places. And then you start to understand your problem, and you create some kind of representational frames, and you say, okay, it's going to be about this long. Sometimes you just know by the genre of document or something what it's going to be. And I need to have some material on the history, some materials on humans, some materials on human interaction, so on. It's going to have about this shape. And then you start filling it. You populate it with stuff. You say, okay, here's a stab. Here's something, a placeholder for now. You start bootstrapping yourself up. You might go right back to changing the representation type. No, that outline's not going to work because I've learned enough filling it that it's broken now. I need to change it. And then you come back out and you utilize the representation. You deliver it, you print it, you publish it, you give the talk, you do whatever. And then inside this, another key kind of interaction that I've been interested in for a long time is the information interaction. How are you getting information? So you have some information need. And these stages roughly correspond to the sense-making. You can call one the other. Sense-making is information access in the big. And information access is just seems like a smaller version. You're making sense of some question or something, right? So you have some need, some goal structure, some characterization of what you want. Then you form some strategy. You say, oh, which source should I use, or which tool, or where can I look? Is it in a book, or what? And then you go and you execute the strategy to some extent. And then you get some stuff back, and you now have to consume it and understand it and internalize it. And then you kind of go, well, this is the wrong stuff. The strategy broke. Or what I've learned now is the right strategy, or something else, and you loop back around. And then you've got information, and you take some action with it. You might start transforming it, or changing it, or mutilating it, or doing whatever you do to get it into a document or into some form to use. And this structure, the graphic up in the upper left, is really trying to represent that it's highly fractal, right? It's that it's nested within each other, and these different kinds of loops of sense-making or information access are nested within. Sometimes at one stage, like trying to form a strategy, you kick off another little loop of information access, like, let me read about this source. Like, who built this thing? Or how much does it cost if I actually download this document? Right? You go into some other little loop. And so this is like the layered structure that we're seeing in the complex problem solving, but it's all over, basically. Everything is complex solving problem, I think, if you look at it carefully enough. So this is about creating a flow with information. How do you interact with this stuff so that you get a flow? Well, we get all these impediments, these backdrafts stopping us in our track from doing what we're doing, right? There's this basic set of human obstacles, or at least as the human is obstructed by things happening in the loop. They just don't understand the domain. If they don't understand what they're trying to do exactly, the content, that would be a typical kind of obstacle. Or they don't understand the tools, and they get thrown into recursive descent around learning about this tool they never wanted to learn about, but meanwhile they got to pick up their kid from babysitter. And so those rings don't allow them to learn about that tool. They're not stupid. And so those are issues caused by the human, or situated with the human, let's say. Information obstacles, two very typical ones, inadequate meta-information. You don't know enough about the information. You don't know who the source is, what the source is, stuff like this. Or the representation is just inaccessible in the broadest sense. The classic example of the Roman numerals versus the Arabic numerals. Try to add with Roman numerals. It's tough. It's an inaccessible representation against the task. Or try to read a German document that's perfect for answering the question you don't know, when you don't know German, that you are actually asking. So it's in an inaccessible representation. Then you get all the new obstacles which us designers are throwing in now, because we're creating new artifacts, tools, and we generate a whole set of obstacles in the tools themselves. This is like the workspace, managing the workspace level of this thing. The tool itself is unwieldy. It just becomes a whole nother PhD to learn Illustrator 10, right? or it's inflexible. You know, you have to do it the tools way or no way. I think that's partly what you're talking about in adhocracy, is, you know, multiple ways to get at what you want so that you can use your insight, you know, whichever way it's shaped to move forward. So an inflexibility of the tool. Well, you know, if it's hyper flexible, typically you get the reverse problem that you can't do anything. It's a noodle. You know, you can't do anything with a noodle except eat it, right? And so it's an imprecise tool. It's a vague tool. Well, this is the search browse issue, right? Search is great in that it's precise. It's great when you know what you're looking for, you know how to say it, and it's there. You're looking in the right places. All the other times, it's terrible. Whereas browse is great all the time because you can always kind of do it. But you never quite know what you're doing in a poorly designed space, and most spaces are. And so these have these problems of inflexibility versus imprecision, and there's some kind of trade-off there. And then there's this whole issue of unintegrated. You know, the tool is just sitting there, and it's just another tool, and it doesn't connect to anything else. It's not embedded in this larger process. You can't get out from one little loop to the bigger loop you're in, or so on. So it's not integrated with where you use these things, points of use. Okay, so closing in now, and how does this all come together? This concept of information flow. For me, you know, it's just a term that really I came up with maybe about a year ago or something to try to characterize some sense of what are we reaching for in these missions that characterizes, and for me it's a pun. You know, it feels like flow, you know, this optimal psychological state. It's about social flow of information, large macroscopic things. It's about this cognitive flow going around. And it's about the larger social flow of us all reaching collectively. So talking a little bit through that, I think we can do things at each of these different levels, and a lot of people's work is about these things. So, and including, you know, what Inxight sells. I haven't talked much about Inxight at all. So starting, you know, with the original vision of augmented intellect, that's really where visualizations come in, faster flow into the head. Let's just use great human skills, things we did before we were born, to leverage those skills in our designs. That's what visualization is about. Enhancing our memory, finding things that extend the limits, the cognitive limits that we have. Supporting the richer access patterns that we want to have. That would be my way of talking about what it is that, you know, having a greater flexibility in the tool, that there's a lot of ways we access information from browse to search. It's a continuum. It's not two alternatives. And you need a little piece of browse inside a big piece of search or vice versa or whatever. Embeddedness, the fact that all the time our activities are embedded in larger activities. And how do we design whole systems such that the pieces all fit within each other. And that tends to lead to not best of breed for every component. It tends to lead to a terminal state where a few very good things survive, good enough things, let's say, survive, because ultimately we can't learn the perfect tool to do, like an alignment tool. You can't own 12 alignment tools. That would cause information overload, right? So someday, some particular alignment tool becomes the broad market alignment tool, and everybody uses that way, and everybody starts to expect that way. So we align socially on something that's good enough that will work for everybody. Okay, then going down to the symbol processing level, we have these stocks and flows of content. Well, there's not enough flow going on. If you go and look at an intranet, documents end up on disks and get never used again. And that was a problem that was felt here in this building in '85 or something. Having invented, the future, you could also see the future's problem very easily. There are documents lost all over file servers, and there's this haunting feeling that somebody worked on this before. It wasn't called an intranet or knowledge management, but it was recognized that that was the issue. And so these stocks aren't moving. So how do we move this stuff? Well, if we use the machines as symbol processors to help us with the processes of meta information generation, then you have meta information, the kind of things that tag information so you can start flowing it around, you can start routing it. You can start looking at content as statistics. The fact that people are talking about certain things is interesting. That's knowledge. And so right now, we don't treat content. There's been 20 years of information technology revolution. That meant relational database, right? And data in nicely sliced things, and we do data mining on that. But all this other content, it's amenable to statistics too if something could see the features in it. And that's where automated extraction of features from text and things like this have some great promise. Moving up to the next level, and I think this is kind of the Alan Kay level in my mind, or the first one was really sort of like the Engelbart level. The next one, I'm not sure. It's everybody's level in the 60s. This knowledge tools level, I think, feels a little bit like Alan Kay and Sketchpad and so on. So how do we build models? Visual models that are tools for holding a bunch of thoughts in frame, like these diagrams are meant to be for me, and I hope for you. They're organizing a bunch of things so they don't fall out of your head, and you can kind of race around them and keep racing the stuff back in and think about things in sequence and so on. How do we organize these kind of models, visualize these models, build these models, understand each other's languages, so on? So this level would feel a little bit like semantic web, or a lot of things that people are talking about, a very small part of the web, but a very noisy and hyped part of the web right now, I would say. Because partly it's a little bit misdirected toward this issue of, it's a standard kind of detour into agents and artificial intelligence and things doing things for me that are intelligent. Whereas what I'm really talking about is assistance in helping you extract things so that you can browse things better. Humans being intelligent, but getting the machine to push through some of the work and helping, construct things, using the machine as a medium. That, I guess, is why I would say it's sort of like an Alan Kay idea. A lot of other people have the idea too. And then really getting to this level of the social plane. And this is really where I start to think about, optimal social experience of some kind. How can we reach together in some way? There's this, if you look at the process of innovation, where have great innovations come from or inventions come from across time, you see really three places, three centers: government, academia, and industry. And there's been oscillation across the 1900s of who is funding and where the great ideas were happening. And just looking at the history is a really interesting thing. It's just like looking at the history of augmenting human intellect was really interesting because it's a social process, and you start to see the richness of it. So there's been this dynamic between these areas. Well, I think there's a fourth vertex arising. And this fourth vertex is, it's characterized in things like open source. It's characterized in things like the Creative Commons, personal sites and blogs. That's people just providing content to the universe. And there's group portals, people getting together on a website and doing something together. Discussion boards, mailing lists, we've been seeing them for a while. Wikis, those are about that, group editing, plenty of trust. It's like, sure, edit it. And because we're going to trust nobody's going to be antisocial. And besides, our database will save and we'll be able to kick you out later if you do anything. So we can paint the wall if somebody does graffiti on it. That's what we do in normal society. And open projects and organization, I start to see things that I characterize as really imaginative attempts to solve hard, wicked problems by getting together somewhere on the web. And so what's this fourth vertex? Well, we all work in academia or government or industry or other things, right? That's our reality. Our feet are planted in this. We're constrained by those rings. But we're also in families. We also have hours in the day. There's been economic rise for a long time. We are in a leisure class. We have some of our own time to do with what we will. And so we can make micro investments into things we care about rather than being licklighter and using sort of a bunch of war-derived money or a Cold War-derived money to fund a boon to human evolution or something, let's say. We each choose. We vote with time. So we get 2 hours in the night, and you see these open source hackers, going and tweaking, somebody else's code and doing something with that. Or you see somebody spending plenty of time on group portals and helping rewrite something better. And so we're seeing this, the power of this fourth vertex. In a lot of ways, that is what was exciting about the period. And I'm glad, the bubble's over. And, it's taken us a long time. Not to mean to be non-serious about the problem caused by economic swings, or to be flippant about hardships that I'm sure a lot of people have suffered since then, or whatever. But I think there's a quietness coming back to where we can kind of think seriously about some real issues. But what was sort of exciting through that period where everybody had this sense of possibility and anything could happen was some of these kind of playgrounds that got created that showed the power of sort of independent efforts. Actually, I would say that the VCs sit in the fourth vertex too, believe it or not. They don't sit in industry because they're really after changing. That's what fueled the first round of fourth vertex thought, right? The Valley and many other things where people worked in garage. That was a round of it. Not everything got invented when Netscape went public, or when HTTP started, or when Xerox shipped the Star. We can go back through our periods of narrow history rewriting and see that history goes a long way back. Luckily, I think the future goes a long way forward too. And so that's the kind of problem that I think this fourth vertex is about, right? It is thinking about how do you organize, how do you use efforts at that level. And that's an area that I'm not sure how it at all connects to Inxight. In a funny way, it's I report to a CEO of a 100-person company. He'd probably think I'm absolutely crazy, but he listens to me, and he hasn't fired me yet. And meanwhile, I think that there's some time at Beikai between 7:30 and 9:30, and other places where you can start thinking about, well, what's happening with these kind of activities? How do these tools connect? And where is there going to be some incredible successes funded by the fourth vertex? When is the SETI of people going to arise? Where you lock a bunch of spare cycles of peoples into projects that do amazing things. They're kind of happening, and I think I'd love to hear anybody's candidates on where the great success of the fourth vertex is, because I see that everything that I've ever been able to do since 1980, walking into this, is an example of a great success caused by this work that happened in the '60s at DARPA that funded a bunch of things that led to a bunch of smart people that spread out. They were smart people. Well, there's a lot of smart people in the world right now, and there's a leisure class out there. I think Mozart would not have been possible without a prince that paid his lifestyle, right? Or there was patronage. Now we all have the opportunity to be little Mozarts in the night or something. And and not that we all need to be Mozart and recognize like Mozart. We can never be Mozart, right? But we can have some insight, and if we can kind of connect those, I look for some great things to happen. And so these are what I'm going to be wide awake on 20 years. 20 years from now, maybe I'll come back and do another Beikai and say what happened in that 20-year period. And hopefully it will be. I predict there will be some grand successes in the fourth vertex. That in fact it's that fourth vertex that is going to produce the solutions against the wicked problems. As I say this, I can't help but feel sort of in my toes and basically all the way up to my nose that this has got to sound hopelessly naive. But I can't help not. But I also say it. I've sat in VC meetings. I've sat in a lot of situations. That's what makes me feel like this. It's got to be hopelessly naive. But I still believe that that is what we got to reach for. That there's got to be some grand success against some real wicked problems. They might be about the ecology. They might be about AIDS in Africa. They might be about other things. I don't think we can lose those other vertexes. But the tension, our values have to come out of that fourth vertex. And that might be what where that grand success comes from. Thank you. Questions? Answers? What's Inxight? I did bring some brochures for anybody that wants to know more. It's a 7-year-old Xerox PARC spin-out. It's about 100 employees. Our focus is loosely knowledge management tools. It's about building better beyond search tools, help you organize content, help you access content. We have visualization technology, summarization, categorization, natural language analysis. We sell these things to the government, to publishers, that are flowing content around, to large enterprises. We're kind of aimed at the big end of the market. I tried at different times to push toward end user revolutions, and a lot of the force has been, if you're going to survive, you got to survive through sort of the space periods, and survive with people that have money, and then be there in 10 years when you've worked out enough ideas and things disperse. And so you look for a very long journey, basically. So that's what Inxight is about. Go to our website. Thank you.
So about your fourth vertex, the wicked problems often lie in the offline world. And the fourth vertex, unlike the other three, is really an online happening group, whatever you want to call it, except the VCs. I know you put the VCs in there, but I'm talking about the open source movements and the other kinds of phenomena which make you hopeful. So that's my big issue with your assertion that the solutions to the wicked problems will come from the fourth vertex. I would love to believe that, but.
Okay, that's good. That's good. That clarifies something for me. The fourth vertex has always been there in the offline world. There's been people getting together, to dump tea into harbors for a long time, right? And so there's been the fourth vertex. I guess what I'm thinking about here is the enablement allowed by the infrastructure we've built over a long time. The same way that the enablement of the intellect for an individual is allowed, or the dynamic medium, or a communication medium, enhancing communication across distance. So I see the rising network, the fact that there's 100 million people, 100 million internet hosts, as a great opportunity to allow sort of globalness and locality at the same time, right? Or smallness and bigness, right? And so I don't know how it all holds together, but I think that's what it is. It's connecting the intelligences that are out there and not living with sort of the casts of the die in one space of what intelligences ended up together.
It's kind of the Rheingold idea?
The what?
Howard Rheingold's new book.
Yeah, I suppose so. I should mention that 2 books I used in the history section as great resources, Tools for Thought by Rheingold, and Licklider's more recent book called The Dream Machine on J.C.R. Licklider. I'm not Licklider, Mitch Waldrop's book. But Rheingold represents this, right? He's been tracking virtual communities for a long time and the rise of it. So perhaps this is just new coinage against an idea that somebody has understood already for a long time. I think a lot of people have understood this idea a little bit. I'm just kind of pushing it or peddling it. Maybe a lot of people pontificate and theorize about all kinds of things. It looks like some fun, so I'll do it too for a little while.
Hi, Mike Van Riper from VeriSign. I'm not sure if I can articulate this, but when I listen to your talk and also to the earlier talk, it's kind of like I get excited and depressed at the same time. It's exciting that you're talking about trying to solve these complex problems and that the tools just don't do it today. But I also get depressed because you talked about some of the earlier innovations and how it might be 20, 30 years before they get realized. And I'm not the best person to be talking about this, but there's infrastructure to make different components to do different types of tasks work together at a very high level. I know a lot of research has been done. I worked at Metaphor on a system that was a derivative of what was done at Xerox, and they had programming by example and the capsule technique, and I just don't see solutions in the marketplace even as powerful as that solution, which no longer is really there, in a major way in the industry. And it seems like, I mean, I'm maybe talking into the future systems buff here. It just seems like there needs to be system level work done so that, I mean, even you look at the open source community, like say Eclipse, this platform, it's cool that there's open source and there's like a framework to plug things in, but still every plugin you plug in is pretty much independent. It like implements its thing and this one implements its thing. When you're trying to do some complex thing with it, it isn't,
it's a big
they don't work
mess.
together, you know, to do that. And, you know, I mean, I worked at a company called Taligent where we're trying to do an infrastructure, do that kind of stuff, and the world wasn't ready for it because they didn't want it, you know. So I'm kind of rambling here, but I hope you get what I'm getting at. It's like we already know what we need to do, but how do we actually get there?
Yeah, so I think it's the difference between sort of a wind tunnel and, you know, a plane really in a storm, right? You know, when you're out there with bodies in it and, you know, and the whole wing, you know, everything, and the wind tunnel tests. It's very easy to do wind tunnel tests. It's not easy to do good wind tunnel tests. You know, a lot of people build things that never should be built because just a little bit of head simulation would tell you that that's not going to work. But things like, you know, there have been many real wind tunnel tests on possible futures. And Park was one, right? And then trying to be the commercial success for it was a much different problem, right? So there's that issue. So let me set that aside for a second. There's a second issue, which is we have to have some sense of perspective or balance in how fast we can expect the change. If the change is really fast, it's not a real change. And so if we're looking for a big change across a lot of things, it just takes time. And this is why, you know, in Kuhnsian revolutions, why does it take at least 20 years? Well, that's about an intergenerational gap, right? That you really have, you know, I hate to say this, but, you know, since I'm subject to it too, the old people have to die and the next people have to come, right? That's not the only law like this, but it's also that when you move from 100 people in Silicon Valley using something to 100 million people around the world using it, that's an enormous thing. And, you know, that is the difference between the wind tunnel and the world, right, or the full thing, right? And so I think we have to have some sense of patience. The real revolutionaries are patient because it takes a long time to change the world because it just doesn't want to change. You know, there's just a bunch of stuff that are stuck, social stuff, physical stuff. So we have to be patient against that. Then you have to look for where can you throw things at a slope and get real impact, things falling down. You know, you get the right rock thrown at the right slope, you cause an avalanche. So being careful and thinking about that. That's what I think the fourth vertex can wield as its sword, is sorting through these vague things. Like, you say you're rambling, I'm rambling. I just happen to be up here and I got to ramble for longer, right? But it's rambly. But if we went onto a wiki together and we rambled together for a while, then maybe we go, okay, well, look, how do we engender this? What would be our first success? What's a little rock we can throw? Right? That's what I think the fourth vertex is. Select a value, select an aim, and then, you know, try something. And that's maybe how you can, you know, solve a problem a few years earlier, or drive attention to the right problems, which is a lot about wicked problems, is characterizing them as wicked problems, wiki problems. So I think that's it. You know, that's what I would ramble about your shorter ramble.
I've got a question on your first slide. Actually, it's sort of I got struck by it's an expansion of all sorts of interesting thoughts, starting with Vannevar Bush, expanding up into the early 60s and maybe through the 60s and into the early 70s, and then it contracted down in the slide, and there was a couple things in the 80s and 90s, but not very much. And so was that you setting the stage, saying the ideas of the 60s and 70s are now here for us, or were you saying there were great ideas in the 60s and 70s and we've sort of been lacking in great ideas since?
I think it is really about the focus of the talk, right? It was focusing on this, you know, the core visions. And every time I kind of think that the core visions didn't envision certain things, I go back and go, wow, they guessed at these things. These guys really thought a lot about their visions. And so it's really hard to have a new idea. It's like trying to be a Mozart composer right now. There's 1,000 Mozarts alive right now, I'm sure. 1,000 of them, and they're never going to be recognized as Mozart. And so there's a little bit that. I think afterwards a lot of different things happened in this revolution, and there became different centers, and the different issues are about who had commercial control. This is where the Microsoft era comes in. Nothing matters except Microsoft after when I stopped talking about history, I guess. Right? So other factors well away from the original vision and the project and mission of information flow really asserted themselves.
Your slides are very beautiful, and I wondered if you would be willing to tell us a little bit about the process by which they were made. In particular, what do rough intermediate stages look like, and how collaborative was the process?
It was extremely collaborative. I worked with a graphic designer that I've worked with before. I'm not a graphic designer. She's somebody I've worked with before. I did a chapter in Richard Saul Worman's book called Understanding USA. It's the first thing I ever did in print, other than in Chi Proceedings, I guess that's print. Sorry, it wasn't meant to be a pot shot or anything. It was just a random throwaway statement. So she's who I worked with. I have worked with a bunch of designers and looked at a lot of different things until I found the kind of ink that could communicate what I thought communicated. That it's about communicating wholenesses. Big picture, I care fundamentally about the big picture, get everything into your head. But without squashing the complexities, without killing it. In the end, it's almost impossible to do that. And this is a pre-release, and there's a lot of work to do still. And so it was a collaborative process. The visuals become generative. It's not like I have this grand theory that's gonna get out in one clean pass. It was sort of like, there's all this stuff, it's banging around. I've got an Emacs buffer that I've been writing in for 12 hours. And it just keeps going and going and going. Now what do I do? And sort, and it's about things that I've thought about for 20 years. And so then as we start saying, okay, how can I get all of this onto it? What's the basic thing? And so on. And a large part, the interesting thing, the process, I did the whole thing through a phone. Wow. It was all done through a phone and email. Now I add some technologies. And I have Illustrator, so I go into Illustrator and stretch and change and do some things. And then I have visual ideas, and I just say, look, the vision of the vertex is a triangle popping into into a tetrahedron. That's it. That's it. So that's got to be the pinnacle of the slide. And so I got some basic organizing thoughts, and you just iterate. But this is a new way of writing. For me, it was a new way of writing. It could have been about like 50 PowerPoint slides, I think, what I had to try to get onto this thing. Maybe I should do the equivalent of an inaccessible representation. Maybe this is equally inaccessible because it's not done. It's been done in 3 weeks. So that's how I'd characterize it. I'll tell you more if you're really interested in something I didn't answer. Well, they're in pre-release form, so I'll tell you what. If you'll sign a beta agreement, so a conventional term about beta agreements is you've got to give feedback, right? The only reason you do these betas is to get some quid pro quo. Eventually, it'll be a 1.0 or something, and I'll put it out. So send me an email. Give me feedback on what you think of the slides right now, and I'll mail them to you, and just give me some feedback later. Okay? Thank you.